dearly beloved, amazing, divine, creative masters. And each one and every one of you have an ego. And the ego is so much a part of the life that people have come to believe that the ego is who I am. But it is, beloved masters, the egoic nature is connected to the very human intellect. And the ego is an element that in the beginning, when God created the physical form, soul had been created for a time and a time, and the next phase of evolution, physical form. So God created the physical body, and then as God creates and learns with creation, and the ego mind says, but God knows everything. God feels, recognizes, and certainly has the imagination, the desire, the power to create. And when the physical body was given, all of those gifts of creation had already been granted to the soul to be a co-creator with I am. But God noticed that the soul essence, being so free, was not accustomed to having a physical form. And having no conscious awareness of how to deal with that or protect it, the soul very often allowed the physical form in the very beginning to be destroyed because of that lack of consciousness. So God gifted the potential humanity with the ego, an element that was designed to make a little bit of fear as what some might call an early warning device. So you are about to step in the fire. Your physical body may not survive that fire. Be cautious with sharp weapons, because it may not be that you would survive being cut. It is that the ego provided a protection, but it also provided fear. And in the beginning, that was something that was necessary and important. In the evolution of the human form, there was a point where ego realized that the time might come when humanity wouldn't require the ego any longer, and its own fear began to take over, because the ego came to feel very powerful in its position as a protector. So, very subtly, the ego began to make suggestions to the collective consciousness, the one mind that all humanity belongs to. And the ego suggested that death was a necessary part of living. And that began to be woven in because there had been incidents where people had died. So, little by little, the ego wove more and more little bits of fear, little bits of mistrust, little bits of doubt, little bits of worry. And yet, in the beginning, ego was indeed a gift from God. So it is. Dearly beloved masters, now humanity looks at the chaos that they find themselves involved in and say, tell us again, why do we have an ego? And the ego indeed is personality. And when personality and divine self are blended, then you have the wonder of yourself as a divine, creative master. And so, why do we have the ego? It is, if you would, an element of what people might call the darker side of life. But it's also connected to the logical mind, which is a gatherer of knowledge. Wisdom is a very deep internal feeling. And a lot of people don't connect within themselves to feel their wisdom. So the ego simply suggests that you probably aren't wise. And then that thread begins to get woven into the personal fabric of beliefs. So, 7 billion plus souls on the planet in this time, and each individual is an absolutely unique, one-of-a-kind combination of beliefs, of hearsay, of religious concepts, of theories, of intellectual gathering of knowledge on subjects that each individual may find either are necessary and important to them or very interesting. They pursue out of curiosity. So each individual is such a complexity of thoughts and ideas, of belief systems, of emotions, of feelings, if you are beginning to connect to your own inner space. And it is all of the judgments that humanity involves themselves with, all of the drama, all of the war, are elements of egoic creation. The ego has devised separation because divine creation is about unity. It's about harmony. It is about oneness. Dark and light are two parts of a whole. And yet, the ego mind has created a fear basis around darkness, around the dark side. And what you can't see is something that people fear. That unknown quality. And yet, in the light, that unknown step forward is called faith. So the ego has created a response that is filled with doubts and questions, so that as you, dearly beloved masters, are experiencing in these times revelation, being more grandly revealed to yourself from the inside out. And as you feel the truth of who you are, it is as though old facades that have been in place so long, how humanity has attempted to present themselves to other people. This is how I want the world to see me. Is it who you are? No. It's who I hope they will believe I am. So I do my best to look that way, act that way, think that way, to convince others that I am what I think I should be. And then the ego, which is a two-headed dragon, steps in and says, but if you don't believe it, then that's probably not who you are. Or what if they don't accept you as what you want them to believe you are? But that all goes on in the ego mind. And it is a conflict that goes around and around and around in the mind warring with itself. And yes, beloved masters, the logical mind has posted, if you would, an energetic God at the gate to your sacred space that exists in the area of your solar plexus. The ego isn't physical, it's energy. But how it has created influences your physical body and all of its systems. How you present yourself in life, the aging process, how you judge yourself and others, and very often how easily influenced you are by the lineage that you chose to be born in, what you have been taught by your parents, by your teachers, by the church, by society in general. And all of these are elements of information, and the logical mind, as we said, is a gatherer of information. Left brain. But the right brain is connected to your artistic, spiritual, and very often the undefined realms that are not physical. And the right and left brain in these times are actually beginning to develop synapses that connect them more closely, because left brain dominance in the physical world has become progressively more powerful over hundreds, thousands of years. There are people that are born right brain dominant, but very often the rules that the ego mind has created for how society must do, be, think, speak, act. And as the ego has created all of these limitations that narrow life down, it has said, but these answers, standard answers, one-size-fits-all answers, simplify life. So in these times, beloved masters, to have the courage to allow yourself to be much more inner connected, to allow right and left brain to function in balance and harmony, to allow that you see beyond the illusions that the ego has created. That's just how it is. There is no other way. And now, the chaos in the planet of all of these logical, very often highly intellectually trained minds in conflict with each other over who is right. And yet, as you connect within yourself, in your sacred space, and it's energetic, it exists in your energy bodies, but it is not inside of your physical form. Its energy influences your physical form. Your ego influences much more in the physical world. And your spirit, up to these times, has been more theoretical. Something that the physical eye could not necessarily see, and the physical ear could not hear. And even though the emotions that the ego has created have been called feelings, feelings are a much higher octave of that emotional makeup. Emotions are reactive, and feelings are compassionately objective. And compassionate objectivity is a dichotomy to the ego mind, because the mind asks linear, literal questions, and it wants linear, literal answers. And humanity is moving to the next phase of human evolution, spiritual humanity, where the outpouring of the Aquarian age, the water bearer, that electrical energy, because water in the physical world very often becomes a driving force in its flow for generating electrical power. And the sign of Aquarius is ruled by the planet Uranus, that is an energy of dynamic force. Uranus is about chaos, and chaos is a dynamic movement of energy that, when you name it, in the beginning was the Word. The first thing that the book of Genesis in the Bible says. In the beginning was the Word. But it wasn't an English word or a French word or a German word or a Latin word or a Greek word. It was an essence, an energy. And the naming of the energy makes it yours. So whatever you say about your life is a part of how you design your life. And the ego always tends to shade things either to manic energy that is so excited and so in the moment joyous that it's virtually out of control, and then it drops into depression. And in that flux, the ego creates the instability, the chaos of creation without consideration. The logical mind will more often than not say the first thing that comes to its mind, or it will be so structured that it will hold to a certain idea, theology, teaching, that is so restrictive, so filled with rules, that there's no flexibility. And the ego, in fear, creates rigidity. And the more rigid that people become, the less flexible they are, body, mind, and emotions. So, in these times of revelation, the new essence calling divine creative masters to remember who they are, feel it within yourself. Feel it within yourself. Feel it within yourself. And the more that you allow yourself to feel that connection to love within you, the more you find that there's a whole new world that has existed all around you, but the ego has very carefully designed illusions and set rules and regulations about believing those illusions, and then created conflict, judgment, painful situations if someone doesn't accept what the general line of thought is. So it takes great courage in this time where all that the ego has created is becoming more and more obsolete. It is time for the ego to step down from the pedestal that it has created for itself and blend into the spiritual human, so that you live a physical life, you're in a physical body, but you're no longer driven by the logical ego mind. And the more you connect within yourself, feeling who you really are, the more you begin to recognize how illogical logic is. It creates separation. It divides rather than bringing together. It is a purveyor of war. And it constantly, this ego mind, is goading humanity to live by the old standards of separation. So throughout time, the churches have noticed that this element called ego is not necessarily pro-Christianity, pro-religion. So many churches have said, let us kill the ego. If you just kill your ego, then you'll be free. But divine creation is not about destroying. It is about transmuting, transforming. It is about integration. And masters, and even though the ego is working overtime to make humanity feel as though they're not good enough, haven't done enough, that they're foolish, they're stupid, they're wrong, they're bad, because this is how the ego has kept its control for so long. The very foundation of bullying is exactly how the ego has kept control of humanity for eons of time. And so, dearly beloved masters, the ego is a part of you, and the more that you come home to your sacred self, allow yourself to connect with the wondrous worlds within you, the more integrated you become. Masters are interdependent. They're not dependent. There are no victims. And they're not independent. I've got to do this all by myself, and I don't want any help. Masters are interdependent. Sharing the energy, sharing and recognizing how beautiful it is to allow faith and trust to open you to worlds of creativity that have always been with you. But the more convoluted the illusion of the ego mind has become, the less the willingness to accept that there is more than just what the physical eyes see or the physical ears hear. So, dearly beloved masters, to open your inner self to a recognition of love that is the foundation of all creation. Love.